My ex-girlfriend's mother sat on my couch at 11 p.m., rain dripping from her hair onto the carpet, her shoulders shaking like a leaf in a storm. "I have nowhere else to go," she said, her voice cracking under the weight of shame. I stood in the doorway, frozen, as memories of late-night dinners and warm hugs collided with the sharp pain of a breakup that had left no closure. The woman who once called me son was now a stranger, hollow, defeated, and begging for shelter. My name is Elias Voss. I live in a small apartment in the city, where the hum of traffic never fully fades and the walls feel thin enough to hear the neighbors' arguments. I work long hours at a bookstore, organizing shelves and recommending novels to strangers who often share more about their lives than they intend. It is a quiet life, one I built after the end of my relationship with Lila 3 years prior. Lila and I had been young, passionate, and ultimately incompatible. We fought over small things, blamed each other for big failures, and parted ways with words that still sting when I let them resurface. Her mother, Margaret, had been the bright spot in that relationship. She taught me to bake bread, listened to my work frustrations, and made me feel like I belonged to something bigger than myself. When Lila and I split, Margaret vanished. No calls, no texts, no goodbye. I never held it against her. Grief makes people do strange things. But seeing her now, soaked to the bone with a tattered suitcase at her feet, I felt an ache in my chest I had not felt in years. I helped her stand, noticing how much lighter she seemed than I remembered. Her once thick, curly hair had strands of gray, and her shoulders, which had always held themselves high with confidence, now slouched under an invisible weight. "Let me get you a towel," I said, leading her to the bathroom. I fetched my warmest sweatshirt, too big for her, but dry, and a blanket from the closet. When she emerged, wrapped in fabric that smelled of my laundry detergent, she looked smaller, more fragile. I made her tea on the stove, the kettle whistling in the silence of the apartment. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at her hands, while I handed her a mug. "Thank you," she whispered. "I know this is asking too much. After everything." I shook my head. "You never asked for anything before." "Not really." She told me her story in fragments, between sips of tea and long pauses. Her husband, Lila's father, had left her 6 months prior, running off with a coworker he had been seeing for years. They had lost their house to debt, the same house where Lila and I had spent countless weekends. She had moved into a small rental, but when the landlord raised the rent, she could not keep up. She had called friends, distant relatives, anyone she could think of, but no one had space for her. No one wanted to take in a woman who had lost everything. "I thought of Lila first," she said, her voice breaking. "But we have not spoken in months. We fought about her new partner. I told her I did not trust him. She said I was being unfair. Then she stopped answering my calls. Her eyes filled with tears. I was so proud. So stubborn. I could not bring myself to apologize first. I listened, saying nothing. Sometimes silence is more kind than words. That night, I gave her my bed, choosing to sleep on the couch. I could hear her tossing and turning for hours, the faint glow of her phone screen illuminating the door gap. In the morning, I woke to the smell of cinnamon and toast. Margaret stood in the kitchen, wearing my sweatshirt, her back to me as she spread jam on bread. "I wanted to do something," she said, turning around with a shy smile. "To thank you. Even a little." We ate breakfast at the table, talking about small things, the weather, the new cafe down the street, the books I had been reading. It felt like old times, but not quite. There was a quiet tension, a knowledge of the pain that still lingered between us, between her and Lila. Over the next week, Margaret stayed with me. She cleaned the apartment while I was at work, folded my laundry, and left notes with reminders to buy milk or take my vitamins. She told me stories I had never heard, about Lila as a child, how she had refused to sleep without her favorite teddy bear, how she had once tried to plant a garden in the backyard and ended up covered in mud. "She was such a kind little girl," Margaret said, her eyes soft. "I miss her. Not the woman she has become, but the one who used to crawl into my lap and tell me everything." Every night, I would catch her staring at her phone, her thumb hovering over Lila's contact. She would draft messages, delete them, draft them again. Pride, she told me once, was a shield that had stopped protecting her long ago. One evening, I came home from work to find her sitting on the couch, her phone in her hand. She looked up at me, tears in her eyes. "I wrote something," she said. But I am scared to send it. What if she does not reply? What if she tells me to leave her alone? I sat beside her, looking at the screen. The message was short: Lila, I am sorry. I miss you more than I can say. I just want to talk. I placed my hand on hers. Pride is not worth losing the people you love, I said. Not when you still have a chance to fix it. She nodded, her hand trembling as she pressed send. The next 3 days were quiet. Margaret checked her phone constantly, her face falling each time there was no notification. I tried to distract her, taking her to the park, buying her favorite pastries from the bakery downtown, but the weight of waiting hung over us like a cloud. On the 4th evening, as we sat watching a movie, her phone buzzed. She grabbed it, her breath catching in her throat. The message was short: where are you? Margaret looked at me, her eyes wide with shock and fear. What do I say? She asked. Tell her the truth, I said. Tell her you are here. Tell her you want to see her. Lila arrived an hour later. I opened the door, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. She had changed, her hair was shorter, her face had sharper angles, and there was a hardness in her eyes I had not seen before. Is she here? She asked, her voice cold. I stepped aside, letting her enter. Margaret stood in the living room, her hands clasped tightly. When Lila saw her, she froze. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with years of hurt and regret. Margaret was the first to move. She took a step forward, her eyes filling with tears. I am sorry, she said. I am so sorry. Lila did not say anything. She just walked forward and pulled her mother into her arms. Margaret sobbed, clinging to her daughter as if afraid she would disappear. Lila held her back, her shoulders shaking. It was a beautiful, painful thing to watch, the mending of a bond that had been broken for too long. They talked for hours in the living room, while I stayed in the kitchen, making tea and giving them space. I heard laughter, then crying, then more laughter. When midnight came, Lila emerged, her eyes red but calmer. Can we talk? She asked. We sat on the couch, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the fridge. I am sorry, she said, looking at her hands. For how things ended between us. For blaming you for things that were not your fault. I was young. I was angry. I did not know how to handle the pain. I nodded. I am sorry too. For not trying harder. For letting things get so bad. We did not talk about getting back together. We did not need to. What we needed was closure, to let go of the anger, the regret, the what-ifs. When she left, she hugged me. Thank you, she said. For taking care of her. For being kind, even when I was not. Margaret stayed with me for another 2 weeks. Lila came every day, helping her mother look for an apartment. They found a small place a few blocks away, with a balcony and a view of the park. I helped them move in, carrying boxes and assembling furniture. On the day Margaret moved out, she hugged me tightly. You are a good man, Elias, she said, her voice warm. You did not have to do any of this. But you did. And you gave me back my daughter. I smiled. You gave me something too. Closure. Peace. Months passed. I went back to my quiet life, but it did not feel quiet anymore. Margaret sent me texts every few weeks, updating me on her and Lila, how they had started having weekly dinners, how Lila had ended things with her partner, how they were planning a trip to the coast. She sent photos too, Lila smiling, Margaret gardening on her balcony, the two of them sitting at a cafe, their heads close together. I kept each photo in a folder on my phone, a reminder of the kindness that had changed everything. Looking back, I realized that night Margaret showed up at my door was not an accident. It was life's way of reminding me that compassion does not have an expiration date. That forgiveness is not just for the person who hurt you. It is for yourself. That the people we think we have lost forever can sometimes find their way back, if we are brave enough to let them. I still live in that small apartment. The walls are still thin, the traffic still hums, and the couch is still uncomfortable to sleep on. But it does not feel empty anymore. It feels like a place where healing happened. A place where kindness mattered. A place where I learned that broken hearts can be mended, not always in the way we expect, but in the way we need. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in the power of forgiveness and second chances, like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We share emotional tales of compassion, reconciliation, and the magic of letting go. Comment below, Kindness wins if you have ever extended grace to someone from your past. We want to hear your story.